Never lose sight of the fact that you are a professional educator. Or even if you're only a part-time educator, you're still a master at what you do. And if you're not a master at what you do, think positively. What's stopping you from being a master of what you do? Maybe just practice. So, why not consider yourself a master of what you do? You know your subject. In fact, you know enough about your subject that you can be an educator. You know enough about your subject that you can talk about it in your sleep. But this level of knowledge can sometimes cause problems. Just remember what happened to me in my first teaching experience. If you're not familiar with that, I'll put a link in the doobly-doo below. But sometimes, getting back on the subject at hand, being an expert can sometimes be a detriment. Have you ever found yourself in the classroom being so knowledgeable that you don't prep? You kind of say to yourself, I can make these discussions in my sleep. Have you ever found yourself putting your lecture on autopilot? You're going to go in during the day, you're going to open up the new lesson for the week, you're going to look at the notes that are on the Blackboard screen and kind of vamp from there. Well, I think we all have at least once or twice. But what I would put to you is that you don't want to do this because it will make you seem robotic at best. Someone who's flying by the seat of the pants in the middle, or someone who is unprepared and unsure, especially if they're just reading the lecture that is right off the board. Your students can read that. They don't need you there. And for us in the classroom, the very worst thing that can happen is you seem disinterested in the material. Because if you as a teacher aren't interested in the material, why should they as a student care at all about the material? They don't want to hear a lecture. They want to be doing, or they just want the class to be over, and if we're at all being honest with ourselves. They have things that they would rather be doing in many cases, besides sitting in the classroom. There are many things that they would rather be doing than that. So, if you are disinterested, why would they be interested? Sometimes when you are on autopilot, you make a false assumption, and an assumption that leads to problems with students and problems in the classroom, which is when you walk into a classroom unprepped and unready, and by that I mean you haven't studied recently the material that you're going to be presenting, you may find yourself missing parts that are left out of the lecture notes, such as, parts which are left out of the lecture notes, such as topics that may lead into from subject 1 to subject 3 or 4 of your lecture. But worst of all is you make an assumption that the student knows as much about your subject as you do. And so if you haven't prepped by looking over last week's material and talking about what you covered, if you haven't set yourself up in a way so that this week's material can be easily reviewed, if you haven't set it up so that all of the vocabulary that you will be using in your lecture has been given before, or you don't have a time for question and answer, how are people going to know what's happening? Oftentimes, a lecture which is put on autopilot, or a lecture in which you are not prepped, is a lecture that you will rush through in the hopes that no one will catch you out, or no one will ask you, hey, could you please demonstrate with the software this particular principle that you're talking about, especially if you are unprepped. Sometimes it happens in a classroom that the classroom material is based on a new software version, and you don't really know that new software version as well as you should. And so rather than taking the time to prep for the new software. You knew what it was with the 2010 version, and now you're on the 2016 version of Microsoft Word. The changes between 2010 and 2016 are pretty profound. They're still mostly the same, so you think perhaps you don't have to take part in prepping for the lecture, but in fact, failing to prep for the lecture puts you in a spot where you are scrambling a little at the last minute, you're tripping through it, you're making apologies to the students, and trying to speed through the lecture. People know that automatically. So imagine this example. You step into the classroom and you haven't used Adobe since Adobe Photoshop CS6, and now you're looking at, which came out in 2008, 2009, and now you're looking at CC 2017, which is, or CC 2015, or let's just go ahead and say CC 2017, which has had 7 or 8 years of upgrades, and now you looked over your notes, and the notes that you have for the class are for CS6, and they're no longer appropriate for CC 2017. So as you begin giving the lecture on how to mask out components or how to select, you find that most of the basic tools are still in the same place, but the tools that you would normally use to refine or to do a nicer looking product are now in completely different spaces, and they are differently moded. And in fact, the things that you would normally use, those don't exist anymore, and they have a new, savvier set of systems. You start to rush through how to mask off materials. You start to rush through how to refine your masks. You're apologizing. You're saying things like, well, they used to keep this in this place. Ha ha ha. I guess we'll all have to look together. Meanwhile, the students who have their books open know exactly where to go. Now the students are telling you where to find the materials. Altogether, this looks like a terrible lecture. The students who don't have their books at class time, and you probably know exactly which students those are having a very hard time following through. And the student who is always asking you questions is getting ready to ask you to demonstrate some of the finer points that are located in the book. And now you're looking like someone who doesn't know the material, isn't sure where or how to find it, is being given instructions by the students on how to make things happen. You look not like an experienced professional who is worthy of respect, but you look like a washed-up has-been. You look like you are not showing as much material as you need to. You look like you don't know the answers to the questions they're going to ask you. It's not an enviable position for an educator to be in. So a mistake can be made if they know something, but not everything. So for instance, if you were to buy a new car, the salesman will not, if they're a good salesman, assume that you know the special features of the Prius just because you have driven a stick shift pickup truck. They will take the time to sit down and point out all the specialties to you so that you know exactly what you're getting into and how appropriate that it is. Similarly, if you find yourself in a situation where a student has used Adobe Photoshop before, you need to slow down and take the time to explain the difference between Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator. They are two completely different programs. Don't assume that because the student has used one software, that another piece of software by the same creator is exactly the same. In fact, they could be wholly different. And knowing one will give you some of the features, but they will not give you all of the features. Now granted, you know this material inside and out. But if you skip over or rush a lecture, students will not know the differences that you're trying to work with. Another thing that can pop up when you feel you know the material as good as you can and you don't prep is that you rush your presentation. Now, one thing I can tell you about students is they will let you know when you are going too slow. They have things to accomplish. They don't want to sit in class listening to a lecture all day, every day. And if you're going too slow, they will begin to prompt you. But one thing that is a bit of a squidgy detail is they will not always prompt you when you are going too fast. If you are going too fast, sometimes they'll just let you keep on going because they don't want to miss any lecture notes. They're busy taking notes because you're going a little too fast for them to demonstrate and follow along with these concepts that you're laying down. And so they have to take notes. They don't have time to stop and object or to ask you, could you please slow down? But you can rest assured that if one student has to ask you, can you please slow down? Many students have had to ask, have been thinking that they need to ask you to please slow down. One of the disadvantages of having so much in-depth knowledge and being so passionate about your subject and perhaps even being so eager to teach a class is that your subject, the students, sorry about that, is that you feel that you need to tell each and every single positive or single advantage or every story or every encounter or every facet of what it is that you are teaching. And unfortunately, that is just probably way, way, way too much. So in the classroom, consider, if you are rushing, slowing down. Leave some time in there for the students to do some research on their own. If there's something that you think is particularly excellent, give them a small taste of it, and then ask them to research it on their own. Make a discussion board of it so that they have something that they can follow into, and then make sure that they have a chance to discuss it with their neighbor. Sometimes a student has a hard time talking directly to you. They may dislike authority. However, their neighbor is someone just like them. It is no problem at all to turn to their left and turn to their right, talk to that person as if they are pure equals, discuss anything of note, and tell them their thoughts and feelings. It works out really, really well. Students love to hear that you know, and that you are approachable, and that you know the benefits and features of whatever it is you're trying to teach. So when you slow down, they get a chance to hear more in depth. They have a chance to stop and ask you questions when they have questions. And you can rest assured that if one person had a question, several people want to know that answer. When you expand too much on the subject matter, you run the risk of telling students and taking their time on things that are irrelevant to their particular needs, or things that are unnecessary for them to hear. They will get easily bored if they are not following along with your story quickly and easily. Remember, when you're telling them what they need, they'll be interested. When you're telling them what you want them to hear, they will very quickly and easily become bored if it is not relevant. But if you have them pursue that material beforehand and then ask them what they need to know, direct questioning is an easy way for you to get your hands on the knowledge that they have and answer the relevant questions. It's also great at the end of a lecture to have an open question and answer time. What you may think is a very straightforward and easy lecture to follow, especially if you haven't prepped, may very well have left several students scratching their heads, or there may be gaps between points that you easily make the connection on because you know the subject, and things that you don't know. So have that open. When students tell you their wants and needs, you know how to better adjust your class to make sure that everyone's needs are being met. This makes you a valuable teacher, a professional who has a strong understanding of what it is that they are doing, and makes the student feel like they can approach you. It's a win-win. If you follow these steps, you will have an understanding of your knowledge. You will give that to your students, but then you will base a certain straightforward section on the wants and needs of the student. That allows you to keep their best interests in mind. If you follow these steps, you will find yourself in a situation where you are no longer tempted to just put things on autopilot. You're no longer tempted to wait until the last minute to look over your materials, but you find that prepping for class is a joy instead of a burden. So, just remember, you don't have to tell everything about every single positive benefit of your product. Just try to use the ones that the students need to know and open up for question and answer, especially if you are using a flipped classroom model where the students read the lecture first, then they come to class and get the expanded lecture from you. Then the open question and answer period will be a great way for them to let you know their wants and needs. And when you are basing a portion of your presentation around the student wants and the student needs, then you'll find that the students have a stronger understanding, the students are getting exactly what they want, and your student-centered classroom, excuse me, and your student-centered classroom is one in which students are encouraged to read ahead. They are encouraged to ask questions. And once your regular lecture is done and the students have already read the material and the students have already asked all the questions that they have, then there's a great time to talk about the other aspects of this, which may be enrichment related or may help them out in other aspects or other problem-solving venues of what it is that they do. To apply this lesson today, first of all, make time before each and every class, I would say 10 to 20 minutes, to prep yourself for what's going to happen. Longer if you have a hands-on demonstration. Revisit your lecture notes and consider flipping your classroom. Try not to inundate your students with too much information that they may or may not find irrelevant, and make sure that you are focusing on exactly what needs to be done. Finally, add in a part at the end of each and every class for question and answer. This is especially well paired with a small portion at the beginning of the class to discuss the minor and major topics that you talked about in the last class, just in case a student didn't catch on and sees the connection between what you talked about last time and where you are this time. And also, it goes without saying, but I'll go ahead and say it in here, make sure that the lecture material that you are covering is set to benefit the students. Make sure that it is specific to them. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast today. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I really do mean it. Just absolutely blow up and destroy that like button. Make it really, really known how much you like this. Share it with your like-minded individuals, and if you want to comment, I would love to hear exactly what it is that you are trying to tell me. I want to know more about what it is that you're doing. This has been Tyler Dockery. Thank you very much. I hope you're having a great week. And by all means, design your future.